Yes, hello, it's Jason Louv. Welcome back to the Ultraculture podcast. Our guest today is Dot Darling, who is kind of blowing up on Instagram. She's a very young influencer in the occult and magic and has accumulated quite a sizable following with her Instagram. She's also working on her new book, which we talk about in this episode. Definitely really interesting for me, now 40, to get the insight of somebody who's half my age on the future of magic and how young people are seeing it. Very odd because, some of you who have been following me for a while remember Generation Hex, the book that I put out in 2006 when I was basically on the other side of that. So yeah, time moves really fast, doesn't it? But I'm very happy that this whole thing is continuing cross-generationally. So, super interesting conversation. We had a lot to talk about, and you're really going to enjoy it. P.S. Tickets are still available for Introduction to Magic, our all-time intensive, immersive, all-day transformative event that's happening online April 23rd. You definitely want to get your tickets for that before the date rolls around, and there are some features that are extremely limited. For instance, we are doing some of the class in virtual reality, but if you want that level of ticket, there's only 50 available because that's the amount the software can handle. So we're really excited about it. We have pulled out all the stops for this course. You can see it at magick.me, magick.me. It is Introduction to Magic. It is now the top course in the list on the page. And check it out. We've also been selling those NFTs that we mentioned in the last podcast. Really kind of an interesting experiment how that ended up. What did we do? We took Solomonic seals from the Key of Solomon, which is a Renaissance grimoire, and fed them into an art-generating AI. And on top of that, instructed the AI to use the Solomonic seals as seed images to create wealth generating or creativity sparking or talismans or whatever intention we were putting into it. We told the AI to put that intention into it. So the intention, first we picked the correct seals from the book for what we wanted. Most of them are I believe half are for career success, the other half are for creative success, and there's one in there that actually already sold for financial freedom. But we picked the specific talismans that have that, that magical kind of charge behind them already, and then instructed the AI with a matching intention. And the results were pretty interesting, I have to say. You can see for yourself. Those are linked from the Introduction to Magic squeeze page, and they're basically priced at the same price that the course is at, so they double as tickets for the course. I think they might actually now be a little bit lower than the prices for the course in dollars because Ethereum has gone down. So yeah, kind of a deal there while it lasts. You might want to grab before Ethereum goes up again. Yeah, so you basically get a ticket to the course and you get a super awesome AI NFT on top of it. Because what are we doing here if not completely warping the future out of all recognizable configuration? Because somebody's got to weird up the future, and it's definitely not Jeff Bezos, so I'm happy to do it. All right, enjoy the show. I will see you in Introduction to Magic April 23rd. It's going to be awesome, and without further ado, here is Dot Darling. Hello, welcome to the podcast. How's it going?
It's going really well. I'm doing quite good this morning or afternoon.
Very
Yes.
good. So, by the way, do you like to be addressed as Dot Darling or Georgina?
You can just say Georgina. If you want to say Dot Darling, you can, but
Okay.
I prefer Georgina generally.
Okay, great. So, your Instagram has blown up over the last couple of years, I think. Just like all of a sudden, like everyone I know has been mentioning you. So, I checked out your Instagram. It was super cool. You're definitely bringing in a very young generation into magic, which is weird to say because I used to do that like 20 years ago, but you're definitely doing that. You have a lot of people watching your social media and following you. So how did you get into this? It's as I know, kind of a strange thing to do with your life. So how did you get into this position?
Yeah, so I've been a practitioner for a number of years and I started the social media stuff pretty much like during early quarantine. I was bored and I was just kind of like, I decided to make a podcast with two of my friends and then I started making social media and I didn't think anyone would listen to any of it. It was just kind of like a way to kill time originally. And then it sort of started to grow and I started doing more and more stuff with it. And I don't know, I found it was good to talk about Thelema because not a lot of people in my sort of like people like me were discussing Thelema. Like I'm younger. And so I wanted to sort of give my side of Thelema and discuss what was going on in the community. And it kind of just grew from there. And now it's become this sort of thing that takes up quite a bit of my time.
Interesting. So did you end up, it sounds like you did you not really know many people in your friend group, but then it kind of snowballed and you got people from all over the world following you?
Yeah. Well, the two people I started my podcast with, who are not the people I do it with now, were just two friends that I had that I didn't like meet them through social media. They were just people I knew. And then I started, talking to other people through social media because like when you have the DMs, like I really enjoyed talking with people and hearing different perspectives. And I've learned a lot from just talking to other people in the community, especially those who have slightly different, practices and paths than mine. I found that has really sort of opened my eyes about a lot of things and been really helpful. But yeah, it sort of just grew from there. And I've made a lot of good friends and connections throughout this almost 2-year journey at this point.
Wow. Okay. So how did you end up getting into magic in the first place?
Yeah, so I got into magic. My family was like Christian, but not very strict about it. And I was actually getting into self-help. I wanted to do like self-improvement stuff. And I started really thinking about spirituality. I'd always kind of thought about religion and I always had questions about like the stuff that I grew up around. And I always had my sort of, I guess, critiques of it. And I was exposed to like the witchy stuff, but it wasn't really for me. I was like, nah, this is not exactly what I want to do, but it's interesting. And then I found The Black Arts by Richard Cavendish, which is like, it's very 70s. I'll just say that. But it was like the one occult book I found in the local Barnes and Noble. And I remember reading it and being like, yes, this is it. And then I started diving deeper and deeper. And I came across Crowley. And I remember the first time I read Crowley, I read the Book of the Law, and I had no clue what was happening. And I was like, okay, don't know what's going on. And then I put it down. And then like a few months later, I was like, you know what? I'll read something else. And I was like, oh, I looked at Magic in Theory and Practice. And I was like, wait, I actually really like this and sort of get it. And then I've started practicing. I'm a very thelemic person. A lot of what I do is thelema. And yeah, that's sort of how I've come to where I am now.
Cool. Yeah, I remember finding that book. That was, I think, one of the first books I saw, The Black Arts. But it's great marketing in a way. It draws people draws people in because it's so sinister looking. But yeah, it's very 70s. A lot of this stuff is very 70s. Some of the older stuff. So, well, you bring up an interesting thing that I wanted to ask, and this seems like such a basic question, but it's one that you actually never hear people discussing, which is how do you feel that magic is actually different from self-help? And other than aesthetics, is it really?
I think there's an overlap, but I don't think they're the same. I think self-help, there is obviously an element of magic that is self-help, in my opinion, right? Because magic, it helps you discover, your true will, your path, and it does do like material improvement in your life, depending on what you're doing your magic for and what your practice actually looks like. But I think magic goes a little bit further because I think once you get out of the like improving your life and finding what you sort of want to do arena, the whole like especially if you start getting into mysticism and like getting close to God, gods, the divine, whatever it is that you're sort of drawn to, I think it kind of leaves the self-help territory. But I think a lot of the practical magic stuff and the sort of beginner stuff that people are exposed to it's pretty overlapping. So I think it just kind of is like it can go further depending on what you're exactly doing. But there is an overlap, and I would definitely say there is.
Got it. Yeah, I feel that it's one of those Zen things sometimes where it's like first there is no mountain, or excuse me, first there is a mountain, then there is no mountain, then there is a mountain. Or it's like when you first start out, it's kind of just like straightforward, common sense, self-help, positive, and then it goes into crazy land for a while, and then it's just like I'm possessed by Mercury today, and like that type of thing, and then after and then it just gets it can get pretty cosmic and out there. But then after a while, it just becomes like just totally common sense, practical self-help again. I've found in my life.
Oh, absolutely. I completely relate to that because when I first got into it, I was exposed to like meditation and little sigils. I remember I liked sigils or whatever. And I was like, okay, this makes sense. And then I started reading Crowley and I was like, so what is this Ra Horqueen? What's a holy guardian angel? What is happening? And then I sort of come out the other side. I'm like, daily rituals, they help me have more structure in my life and more discipline. And these spirits are helping me grow as a person. And so I literally is that exact trajectory.
Got it. Yeah. So it sounds like so you would say magic has definitely been positive influence on your life.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've definitely had my like missteps and my not the best moments with it.
Well, tell us more. What have those been like?
Oh, there are quite a few. I've tried to just like do when I was new, I was like a little over enthusiastic, and I sort of tried to do things that I probably wasn't quite ready for. And then I was like, wait, I'm into a little too deep. But I've sort of it's mostly helped me. Like I've really seen a lot of improvement in my life. I've once again I've had my little slip ups, but in general, it's been a good thing for me. That's why I've stuck with it. I feel like if it was making my life worse, I probably would have just dropped it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the slip ups are important too, and but that's true of learning anything because you learn what not to do, and that's part of the learning process. I think for anything, not just magic. So I don't.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't
I think it's good to kind of scrape your knees sometimes and
Oh yeah,
learn
no,
the
I've
hard way.
I've broken my knees at times and lost my lower legs and things, but it's all a learning experience for sure. So cool. So it sounds like you're super into Crowley right now and Thelema. So that
Yes.
what is it about that drew you in more than the other stuff?
Yeah. So at first, my interest in Crowley began with just like who he was. I'd seen him in like the cult. He's kind of like a cultural mythos in a lot of ways, and he's very shocking and out there. And I had that little edgelord streak in me, and was like, I want to read the most shocking thing I can find. And so I looked into him, and what I really started liking is that the magic is done for a reason in Thelema, because I like that it's when you get into Thelema, magic is done to sort of like find your true will and accomplish that and accomplish the great work, which gives like a path and a trajectory. Because I found when I was reading a lot of stuff at the beginning, I was like, cool, so I'm doing like say a money spell or I'm doing an LBRP, but like what is it really for? What is it building to? And I kind of like that Thelema sort of has an answer to that question, because otherwise it kind of felt a little directionless. And I was in that kind of like dabbler soup where I'm like, I don't know what I'm looking for. I don't know what I want. And as well, I like the sort of ceremony of Thelemic rituals. I like that it syncretizes a lot of things together, because I think there's a lot of value in a lot of different systems. And so I like that Thelema kind of pushes things into a syncretic thing. So all that together made me really appeal to it. Now I actually am not a big a fan of the sort of shocking Crowley stuff, because every time I talk about Thelema, I feel like I need to give like 50 disclaimers. But
Yes.
I mean, he was a character. I'll just say that.
Yeah, he definitely was. I feel that I've spent 20 years trying to understand Crowley, and he's different every time I go back to him. I just did a podcast a few episodes back with Tobias Churton, and
Oh yeah.
who's written like 6 biographies of Crowley, and he was telling me a bunch of stuff that I didn't know before. For instance, and I found out a bunch of new stuff reading his books. For instance, that Liber Oz was written as World War II propaganda against Nazi Germany, which I had no idea about. I thought it was just like a general kind of libertarian pamphlet. So yeah, he just seems different to me every time I look at him, and I almost feel like every time I read his books, they're different in a strange way. I don't know if that makes
Oh,
sense, but
same.
yeah, it's really odd. Yeah, Crowley definitely is one of those people that, as you grow and your perspective changes, it's kind of like it's almost like he changes to match. It's very strange. But what would you say your definition of true will is, if you're kind of in a thelemic paradigm?
Yeah, so my sort of take on true will is that true will is it's something that you sort of live in alignment with, and it's something that you have to discover. So it's a thing that's sort of set, it's a thing that exists, and you have to through ritual discover what it is and then live in alignment with it. Sort of like how Taoists say they like live in line with the Tao. I think the true will is very much like that. I don't think it's a question that's like answered once and you're like, that is my true will. check that off. I think it's more something that through these rituals, through communion with various spirits, you discover what it is and how to live in alignment with it. And when you're sort of flowing with it, things I've noticed tend to kind of fall into place and work out.
Do you feel that magic or Thelema in general is actually necessary for following your true will?
I think to an extent, yes. I think that maybe not specifically Thelema, but I think you need to discover it somehow. I think there's sort of different paths up that mountain to get there. I don't think there's one singular way to discover your will because as like we all have different wills, it's not like some rigid single thing for every single person. As Thelema, you mentioned a second ago, has that kind of libertarian spirit to it in a way. But I definitely think you need to find it somehow. I think that maybe deep contemplation could work, or doing, say, like Eastern traditions to get there. I think you could, but I think you have to do something to figure it out.
Yeah. Well, it definitely seems like, one thing we talk about here a lot is that if you look at anyone, it seems to me, often the most occult people or excuse me, I shouldn't even say occult, the most magical people and the most magically successful people are definitely not doing traditional magic at all. But if you read their biographies or you look at their backgrounds, they're all interested in something, some type of meditation or positive thinking or some type of practice that is, to all intents and purposes, magic, that is giving them that edge. And that's one crazy thing that I've realized, obviously doing what I do, and I end up teaching people from every walk of life, because it's on the internet now. It's a bit anonymous, and so you'd be well, maybe you wouldn't because you're running an Instagram. It's like you'd be amazed how many people from the least likely places end up taking my classes. But it really is, I really do feel that there is something to the idea of the new aeon, where it's kind of like we are in a magical time. Everyone, if you look at the media or like anything, everyone wants some type of magic. There's always some type of supernatural element, whether to everything that everyone is doing. It's usually like through technology or computer graphics or something like that. But everyone wants to be more than human. That's like what every single thing in the media is telling us. Nobody wants to be, just a basic human anymore. And I've actually read, Orthodox and Sufi writers who criticize this a lot and say that there's too much magic in the world. We're all we've become all Luciferian, and we need to go back to just being normal human beings. So I really feel a lot of the times that at least Crowley's analysis, whatever language you want to look at it from, of kind of the new aeon and the laws for all and magic is for all, is like, that's totally true. Like everyone, particularly successful people, seem to be tapped into this current, whatever you want to call it, of utilizing the mind and meditative techniques and self-help techniques and things like, or magic, straight up ritual magic techniques to become successful and go to the top of their field. Yet none of them are doing anything that would be recognizable as like from, a lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram or something like that. So that's certainly, I don't know how you feel about that, but that's definitely been interesting for me to realize over the last couple decades.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of quasi magical stuff that people do that they wouldn't call magic that sort of gets that same sort of result. And I do think Crowley's analysis of the new aeon is pretty accurate. I think that we are very focused on moving beyond, on the next step, what is beyond this sort of human mundane life. I think you can say the new aeon is good or bad. Like, I think you could see Crowley's idea of the new aeon, this sort of individualistic time where people are trying to get beyond that. They've moved beyond a lot of these older spiritual models into something completely new. You could argue that's a bad thing. But I think his analysis that it's here is pretty true and pretty clear, especially like if you think about when he said that in the early 1900s versus now, it's become much more clear and focused. And as well, like in the third chapter of the Book of the Law, which is when the one that's really about the current aeon, the new aeon, there's that level of sort of this warlike intensity that I also see in modern culture pretty pronounced. So whether it's good or bad, I think is a different is a whole conversation a person could have. But I think it's clear that we've sort of tapped into something that does align with what he was seeing.
Yeah, I think he was right. And I don't think that, sometimes I feel that the more I get away from any type of organized or dogmatic Thelema or like the system that he left behind, it's like the clearer it becomes in the sense of his analysis of the new aeon itself. I think is correct. And whether it's good or bad, it just is. It's an accurate description of what's happening. I mean, down to social media, every man and woman is a star, right? And you know, those combined forces of Leo and Aquarius of just absolute warfare, destruction, unbelievable capacity for the human race to destroy itself, combined with the Aquarian impulse of need, this childlike need for all spiritual traditions. It really is the Horus the child, I think, and at least according to Crowley, we're going to be stuck with it for a few thousand years. So better learn how to navigate it.
Yeah, you gotta adapt, right? Isn't that the ultimate test of like human evolution? You can just adapt to new circumstances, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Adapt or die. But that's magic and evolution, consciousness evolution, same thing, right? Absolutely. So you've spent, it seems like you've spent a lot of time kind of trying to reach a more mainstream audience to discuss magic, and this seems to be something that you're very good at in terms of basically being an influencer and getting this material out to a wider audience. What has that been like for you, and what have you kind of learned during that in that process? I'm super interested.
Well, thank you for that. First of all, I'm just going to be flattered. But it's been interesting because Thelema is definitely a bit more fringe than what a lot of people are exposed to when it comes to like magical or magically adjacent ideas. I find a lot of people are sort of aware of like the new agey stuff, which I'm not a huge fan of a lot of the new agey stuff. I think it can be good as like a gateway drug to occultism, if I could put it like that. But yeah, it's been interesting. I find that people are more receptive to the ideas than you would think. I've found that phrasing things in specific ways makes people a little bit more open to it.
What have you found there? What have you found there? I'm interested.
Yeah, I find if you drop like certain words that sound really extreme and phrase things in like a more general way, people tend to understand it a bit quicker. Like if you drop a bit of the jargon when you're talking to non-occultists, they tend to be pretty receptive, and people surprisingly agree with quite a bit. But there is, of course, the con with kind of talking to more mainstream people about Thelema is that it does. The con of it is that sometimes you kind of have to water things down, which I don't like doing. And I don't want to do that. But sometimes people they'll sort of take it in a way and run with it in a way that's really no longer Thelema at that point. But yeah, it's been interesting talking to non-Thelemites about Thelema. And there's also, of course, the whole getting beyond the elephant in the room that is Crowley, and people making assumptions of what individual Thelemites are like based on the actions of Crowley. I find that happens a lot. I've had people assume I'm like some very out there hedonist, which is, I'm very squarish. So that's always a bit fun to navigate. But people are surprisingly open-minded about it. I think also the whole pandemic thing has made people more interested in spirituality in general. Because when people were stuck inside, they had to think about these really heavy topics a lot more, and a lot more people sort of gravitated towards the occult and thinking about these questions. Like you saw it gaining more traction on social media during that period. And it slowed down a bit as things have reopened and hopefully gone back to normal, hopefully. So I'm curious where it'll go over the next couple months, but I think now sort of a renaissance just based on that whole thing.
That's really interesting. Yeah, it's funny because I've had a prediction about 10 years ago that that's kind of come true, but in a totally different way, which is that what I expected to happen about 10 years ago was that everyone was going to start losing their job to automation and AI, and that the government was going to start rolling out some type of universal basic income, which would give people the leeway to kind of not have to work potentially, in which case there'd be a lot of spare time and people would get real invested in potentially spirituality. It might lead to a new renaissance. That hasn't exactly happened, but then we got COVID, which is way more extreme. But I've been just trying to stay alive in my own life during COVID, so I'm really curious about your analysis here. So when people got interested during the pandemic, during lockdown, it makes sense that they would become interested in meditation, spirituality, things like that. But why magic per se? And what do you think people were wanting out of it? Getting into it all of a
So
sudden?
I saw I went on Google Trends with my co-host Temperance Alden at one point, and we like put in a bunch of occult keywords and like tracked where they peaked and fell. And there was a huge boom across the board right at the beginning of COVID, and a couple months in, they were going way up on Google Trends.
Wow, I had no idea.
Especially like witchcraft related terms. And what I guess from this, my theories, is I think people, obviously the chaos made people go internal, and people historically, whenever there's like a lot of stress, tend to get more religious just generally. That seems to be a common theme. And I started thinking that maybe the more pagan stuff was appealing because people were so stuck inside and on technology that they like had like a reactionary, like, I want to go back to my natural roots kind of thing. I think the pagan stuff, it's like people were so kept in technology that they wanted to like connect to that natural history and like the land stuff. Because all of these witch people were talking about like land spirits and ancestors and stuff. So for me, I was like, maybe people are so inundated in technology that they kind of want to run the other direction. I think that's part of it. And I think the magic stuff is just people, when they were stuck inside, they had to really reflect on what was going on in their life. And I think a lot of people realized that they weren't fully happy. Like I remember seeing a lot of people getting into like baking bread and all these sort of like things that they wouldn't have had time for. And I think that people were just thinking about, what am I missing in life? And so they wanted to bring more stuff in. Those were sort of my various guesses on why it sort of went up in the way that it did at the time.
That makes sense. I mean, people are also much more domestic now, obviously, so they have the ability to maybe to do that type of stuff. But I'm curious, that's super interesting. Did you look up numbers on other religions? For instance, did you was there a peak in searches for Buddhism or Christianity? Or not that necessarily, not magic's not a religion, but you see what I mean? Like I'm wondering if maybe it was a rising tide floats all boats type situation where all spiritual things may have gotten a boost in searches.
I looked at a few other ones, not at the same level that I looked at the occult stuff. It seems like it was a general rise, but it did seem like there was a disproportionate rise for these kind of more alternative spiritualities. Like their growth was just kind of disproportionate compared to the other ones. But it seems that people generally became a bit more religious during it all. And since it sort of opened up, I've noticed that the searches have gone down a little bit, which I kind of predicted as life goes back to normal, but they are still higher than they were before.
Wow. That's really interesting. Obviously, interest has gone up in the courses, so that is really interesting. I wonder what effect that will have going forward, because I've definitely noticed that even in the last year, I mean, I've been talking about this stuff for 25 years now, and when I first started, I knew like 4 people in the world who were into it, and it was really socially unacceptable. Like really, like the only people that were into it were like real sketch people and like furries, or not quite, like ElfQuest fans. It was just like it was super sketch. But now it's everywhere, and that's something that I've been trying to, I've basically been trying to encourage for 25 years and repackage it in a way that is appealing. But it definitely feels to me like in the last year we've suddenly turned a corner where I don't feel embarrassed to talk about it anymore, and that's like never been the case. So something must have shifted. I don't know. Maybe it's just because I've been inside for 2 years, but so I don't know. I don't feel any social pressure anymore. Maybe that's it. But it seems like something's shifted.
It's been easier for me in the past year too, right? Because like I'm younger, I'm in my early 20s. So I got into it while I was a teenager. And at first when I was into it, like it wasn't as unacceptable as I think it was 20 years ago by any means. I think I came in at a pretty good time. But I felt weird. For me, I kind of just felt like a weirdo when I first got into it. Like I remember telling some of my friends and being just generally kind of like, please don't think I'm schizophrenic. Please don't think I'm crazy. But the past year, I've pretty talked about it like shamelessly. Like it's become more, people are way more okay with it, I've noticed within the past year. And I honestly, like, this is a weird thing to credit, but I think maybe the witch talk thing or like it getting really trendy may have helped with that, because I've always had it pretty easy because it was not like I knew a few people who were vaguely interested in it when I started, but it's definitely become bigger and I think more okay and less weird. So I think it's definitely turned that corner for sure.
I agree. And I would absolutely credit, not just certainly Witch Talk, or previously it was Witches of Instagram, but I would absolutely credit the women's witchcraft movement for that, for a big part of it. For sure. That has shifted a lot. And yeah, very interesting. I think part of it also, particularly now, is kind of like, well, like what else you got? You know what I mean? It's like what have you got that's working so great? Because the world is just falling apart, and every single system is just or scaffolding that was put up that was supposed to be quote unquote consensus reality, which actually did seem like a thing, certainly in the 80s, less so in the 90s, but then after the 2000s, just like forget it, it doesn't exist anymore. And now it's like, well, literally nothing that quote unquote mainstream culture is doing is working. It's just like held together
absolutely.
by just pretending it's working, basically. It's just like completely crumbling. So it's kind of like, I was talking to my editor John Graham the other day, who is just saying it's like, sometimes magic seems like the most sane, rational, and stable thing all of a sudden.
Oh, completely. It is a chaotic time. No matter what you sort of believe, it's just everything seems like it's up in the air, like everything's all over the place. No one knows where things are going to be like normal or oriented at all anymore. And at least with magic, no matter what happens, you can still do it. You can still have your practice. You can
Mm-hmm.
still, work with the spirits you work with. It's a consistent thing that's going to be there because it doesn't necessarily depend on all these other variables in life that are just all over the place right now.
Yeah, that's very comforting. And I think that's 100% true. It never changes. It's always there. It never leaves you. And every time that I've been, magic for me is the only, I just turned 40. Magic to me is the only running thread essentially throughout my entire life. And it has never let me down. It's always there. And whenever I've really, people are like, oh, like magic is going to mess up your life. I would say au contraire. Like every time I've really been in a pinch, magic has been there to get me out of it. Even if I didn't think I was consciously doing it. So there is, I think, such a thing as the magical current. And for me, that's very comforting. And it should be comforting for people who are into it. And I can just definitely say that from my experience. It's like, that's 100% true. I'm curious. So this is definitely new info for me. So from what you're seeing, where do you think this is going to go? You said that the search trends were kind of coming down a little bit, but do you have a sense of where magic is going to go in the future?
Yeah, so my sort of theory is that it's going to it's kind of past its like peak, but it's going to still be more popular than it once was. I think it's going to continue to mainstream. I've noticed over the past couple months, like certain newspapers, the Washington Post has run multiple like tarot stories and stuff like that. I think it's going to become a lot more normalized and sort of integrate into not mainstream culture, but like mainstream counterculture, if that makes sense. Like it's going to be a thing that's present and not seen as completely bizarre. I think it's going to be normalized in the same way that like astrology and like crystals are kind of normalized now. Like they're seen as a bit quirky and weird, but they're not like completely out there. Like if I would have talked about, say, Goetia 5 years ago, I would have gotten. I mean, Goetia's still a bit edgy. I'll say that's still
I
kind
think
of fringe.
Goetia will always be edgy. But they're
Yeah,
putting
I
it.
think
They're putting
that's
it
one that
in
maybe
movies
that's
now.
not the best example.
I mean, they put it in that movie Hereditary. I personally hated that movie, but that was a big movie. It's like these things are definitely out there in the, in the mainstream for better or worse. Maybe it's for worse. I don't know. Maybe we shouldn't have let the
Yeah.
genie out of the bottle, but it's out.
Well, yeah, that's my thought about it. Like, there definitely are sort of cons to the occult mainstreaming and getting more popular. Like, it gets watered down, it gets diluted. You get people who come into it and don't know what, and are like idiots about it and all of that. And then, of course, you get people kind of, consumerifying it. But like, you can't undo what's already been done. I think it's kind of like a waste of time to be like, well, I wish the occult was never popular. We should go back to the Hermetic Order of the Golden. Like, it's not going to happen. So it just seems like I mean, I don't really want that to happen, but it's just a waste of time. I think we have to just adapt to what's happening now and, make the community as best as it can be, like in the current state. I think in general, it's much better to be an occultist now. Personally, I'd rather be an occultist now than like during the Satanic Panic or something.
Yes. I can testify to
Like,
that.
I
Yeah.
think our problems are a lot less severe now.
Yes. Yes.
Like people being cringy about it is not really, it's annoying, but it's not that big of a deal
Well,
in the end.
it's interesting you bring that up. It's like, I lived through the Satanic Panic, and
Yeah.
and at the time, like being into this stuff could literally get you killed in some parts of the country. It still can in certainly in many parts of the world, but let alone the U.S. But my thinking in pushing so hard to mainstream magic in the early 2000s was that it provides cover, quite frankly, because I knew very clear. Obviously, I knew everyone knew ahead of time it was going to get cringy, and I knew that very full well going into it. But I took a lot of heat, and prior to me, Genesis Purge took a ton of heat for working to mainstream it, and but I took a ton of heat, never from the mainstream, not even from Christians, but from other occultists who are like, no, it's my precious. You can't, you can't give away my secrets.
I relate to that one very intensely, because other Thelemites have interesting opinions on me. I'll just say that. I get the most heat from other Thelemites or other occultists who don't like Thelema for whatever reason. Some of those reasons more legitimate than others. Some I think are ridiculous, but other Thelemites have a lot of thoughts on me. Because they get mad that I'm like making Thelema more popular or talking about Thelema without the pretension, and it's a lot of like infighting. I get called like the e-girl a lot, which
well, some things never change. You can always rely on Thelemites and occult people to be like that. They've been like that since the dawn of forever.
Yeah, it's interesting. But to be honest, like I like that when I talk to non-occultists, I can like use reference points like, yeah, there's like, I'm like kind of like an astrology girl, but a little bit more serious. Or, yeah, I'm kind of into tarot. It's a little more than that, but sure. Like it's easier for dealing with people. And if other Thelemites think I'm like annoying or cringy or whatever, like so be it. Thelemites can't agree on anything, so I think like no matter what I'm doing,
right? Yeah,
Thelemites would be coming at each other. We're very good at it. We're very good at it.
At the end of the day, it's just like, well, then do your will, bro. Like, don't pay attention to me then if I annoy you. It's like I get all this heat. It's like, oh, he's doing this, that, or the other. It's like, well, then there's a billion things on the internet you can look at. Just whatever. So don't follow me. Like, end of story. But yeah I think it's very good, and I'm glad that the spell worked in a sense. It's like I think it's very good that it's become so mainstream, because when everyone's into it, even if they're kind of cringy and shallow, the people who are really serious are no longer stick out, and it provides cover. We're much safer. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Also, like, what's with this notion that cringy people or people who didn't take it seriously or did it poorly, like, didn't exist before?
Right.
I don't think that's true. I think there have definitely been like idiots throughout the
It's always
community.
been cringe. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that's like a new thing. I think that it's just there's more numbers, so it's more visible. But I don't think this is some new thing. Like, oh, if we didn't put the occult on the internet, like nobody would be dumb about it. Like, I just think that's kind of a ridiculous take.
Yeah, it's also just like kind of like, who are you to gatekeep? Like, you didn't make this stuff up. And I don't mean you, obviously. I just mean people who get gatekeepy about it. And let's say maybe somebody seems shallow now. Well, where are they going to be in 10 years? It's like none of your business. It's like, it's not up to you. And like, really, it's, as one of my friends puts it, there's too much gatekeep, girl boss, gaslight going on, and it always has been in the occult. It's like, nobody owns it. Nobody gets to say that other people can't be into it. It's like, and in that sense, the whole idea of the new aeon that's what it is. It even says in there, and it says in the Book of Babylon, it says that this is the rituals of the old time are black. This is for everyone now. It's out of the bag. Like, forget all of this Masonic stuff. Like, just forget it. It's no longer relevant. And I don't think it is relevant. It's, the internet is the manifestation of the waves of Aquarius for this aeon so far. So
yeah, you can't put back in the bag what already happened. I mean, it was whoever made the computer kind of set us on this track. So it's just the reality of the situation. And gatekeeping, like, the only argument that for gatekeeping that I'll sometimes be like, maybe I get it, is like to protect people or whatever, or prevent people from doing rituals not ready for it. But like, people will do them anyways. Like, even if you tell them not to do it, like if someone's gonna be dumb, they're gonna be dumb. Like, I'm not trying to be like harsh, but I just feel like if someone really wants to do something they're not ready for, like, you're not going to stop them by saying not to do it. Just give your caution and say, hey, maybe you should know how to do an LBRP before you like do a Nokian. But like, we can't stop people. It's just, you have to give your warnings and give your advice, but gatekeeping doesn't really work, in my opinion, anyways. Like, even if you try, if someone's super ambitious, you can try to gatekeep as much as you want. They're going to figure out how to do it anyways. So you may as well tell them how to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, with that said, I'm curious, so what kind of drew you into this pursuit of making educational content for YouTube and Instagram and trying to put out information into the public? Like, how did you get started on that, and what called you to that?
Yeah, so I started moving beyond my like little podcast and making educational stuff because there isn't a lot of Thelemic content online. Like, I just noticed a lot. If you look up like Thelema, a lot of the stuff's pretty old, or it doesn't get updated frequently, or it's like blogs, and blog reading is a lot less popular now. Or maybe my fellow Zoomers are lazy. I don't know. And so I was like, why don't I make some more? Because there is like Thelema stuff there, but there's not a lot of it. It's not getting updated. A lot of the websites are like probably like running off software from 1992, which is fine. There's a lot of great information on those, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. No,
or it's like sure. The YouTube videos that are like a video of someone doing a PowerPoint in like the back of a lecture hall. Like, those videos are typically the best, like some of the best information, but like people don't watch them because they're not visually drawing. Like, people are shallow in that way. And so I was like, you know what, I'm going to make content that I would want to watch. That was kind of my thought. And so I just I put up a camera and film against this wall, and I did my, like, I tried to make things very beginner oriented, because a lot of the stuff is, there's like occult content tends to go one or two ways, right? It's either like super beginner witchcraft stuff, or it's like using like AA jargon everywhere, and it's no one can decipher it without some, and I wanted to like bridge the two. So I try to make like beginner stuff, but I try to go a little bit deeper sometimes and do it in a way that's presentable, because I can't talk in that pretentious way. I can't take myself seriously doing it. Like, I can't take it seriously whenever I do it. So I can watch it, but I can't do it myself. And so I just started trying to make what I wanted to see. And I made like some videos. I still make videos and stuff. And I try to update regularly. And whenever I see like new people talking about Thelema, I try to take them on my channel or my podcast, so people know that they exist. And all that stuff, because it's where there's not a lot of stuff about us that pop up, I've noticed, which is weird, because if you look at like local groups wherever you live, typically the OTO is one of the few groups that comes up, right? Like, when people try to find occult communities, Thelema stuff comes up pretty easily, but there's not a lot of educational stuff about it, which I found a bit bizarre. So I was like, you know what, I'll just make a video, maybe good, maybe bad, but I'm gonna do it anyways.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think well, there's always been Lon Miludicat, and then at one and there were Rodney Orpheus's books as well. I don't think he's still doing them, but yeah, it's always been an underground thing for sure. So do you find that the kind of the more beginner friendly videos do really well?
They tend to, yeah, well, because there's always new beginners, right? People need a way in. I feel like people need, in a sense, something to jump off of, because going from like, hi, Wicca is like, what is Wicca 101 type stuff, to, reading. Duquette is great. I love Duquette's work. I'm really inspired by him, by the way. He's one of my favorites. To reading, like, say, straight up Crowley, right? There's a big gap. And so I've tried to make beginner content that goes a little deeper. So it's like beginner, but it's not beginner, if that makes sense. Like, it's like level 2. So what I've tried to sort of orient towards, because people need a jumping off point. But I don't want to feed everything to people. And I try to always, in everything I do, like, point, like, you're supposed to go deeper than this. Please don't blindly listen to me. I am one person. People will disagree with me. And so I always try to like give resources and stuff to go to the next step, because I find people don't really know how to get from here to here. So I've tried to be the bridge.
So how do you bridge those? Like, how do you guide people across the abyss?
I try to just talk about like I try to use like friendly ways of speaking, make my content approachable, but talk about slightly deeper concepts, right? Like, I'll talk about the tree of life, right? Which is something that I think is good to know. Or I'll talk about, egregores, or Jack Parsons, or the Golden Dawn. I've talked about the Abram Ellen, stuff like that. That is sort of like stuff you approach a little bit later. But I've tried to make it, so that people know how to actually read the stuff. People have that language, and people have a sort of intro into that. And I've been recently going a little bit deeper on my podcast. because that I have more time. And so I've been able to get into like a little bit heavier topics, which I've enjoyed because I don't want to only make like 101 stuff forever because eventually, people, they want to move on to the next thing. And so I've tried to just make it like get a little bit deeper, but still be something that you could click on and not be lost if you don't know a lot.
Do you find yourself kind of addressing misconceptions a lot?
Yes, yes. I feel like I have to hit those because there's a lot of them. And if I don't, people get, I don't know. I feel like when you talk about especially Thelema, there's a lot of misconceptions you have to like immediately clear because people otherwise kind of have this like this media formed conception of what Thelema is, right? People have this idea that Crowley was this like evil Satanist who, I don't know, was shooting up heroin while killing children, right? And I feel like that's something that I have to kind of address before people feel comfortable like knowing about him. I know recently there's been a lot of people claiming that Crowley was like quote unquote problematic, which that word kind of makes me want to rip my eyes out. But
yes,
people have been trying to like cancel Crowley, which guy's dead. And so I feel like I have to address this stuff because every time I don't, like I'll like make a little cute video being like, this is a great book about Thelema I read recently. People in the comments will be like, did you know Crowley was literally evil, killed 9 million people and was the worst man alive? And I'm like, oh God, I feel like I just have to because otherwise it always comes in. Like every time I say Crowley, I get a few comments that are like, did you know Crowley bad? And I'm like, wow, that's never occurred to me. I sometimes when I reply to them, no one's ever said that to me. Never. I had no idea.
Right. It's amazing that this guy's been dead for 75 years now, and yet people still have intense opinions about him, so he must have done something right.
Oh yeah, people recently this sounds so dumb. But I need to share it because it hurt my brain. So a bunch of the TikTokers have tried to cancel Crowley. Over the past few weeks, they've been making videos like Crowley was so bad, and I'm like, dude's dead. Yeah. Well, you're not gonna get like an apology video from the guy. He's dead. Like, what do you want? What are you trying to accomplish from this?
Right. Yeah. I from what I understand, there's some type of movement to like de-Crowley Thelema, and it's kind of like, well, how do you do that? You know what I mean? It's like go figure. But yeah. I think that, look, Crowley was a human being, and there were lots of really damaged parts of him, obviously, and I think that he was honest about it, which is rare, which is what I appreciate that about him, because there's so many people who want to appear perfect, and that's when you really have to worry about someone when they're trying to appear, in my opinion, when they're trying to appear like this some perfect saintly individual. Then something real twisted is going on. But yeah, or just they're completely out of touch with reality. And I particularly as I've sat with Crowley for 25 years now, it's just I definitely come to a more nuanced feelings about him, just having just being a human being with ups and downs and not really a cartoon character. I mean, he had a lot of missteps and he messed up a lot in his life. But that's life, I
don't think I've never thought everything he did was great. Like, I think that he was a brilliant mind, and I think he had a lot of great ideas and he was very insightful, and I would say a great occultist. But are there some things that, especially like in his personal life, that I have gripes with? Yes. I don't think he was like I don't think he was like Jesus Christ or something. And he was a human being. And I think another thing when we consider Crowley is the fact that we have so much records about his life, right? We have his journals, we have his life, like we have so much information on him. With a lot of these older figures that we don't know as much about, like we don't have that much information on them. I feel like if you took anyone's life and published that much about them and had all their private journals, it's like of course they would be problematic. Of course they would have bad things they've done. Like, yeah. It's just the fact that we know so much about him, I think, is a big variable in this conversation.
That's a really good point. I've never thought about that, actually. It's just kind of like he wrote so obsessively that just, I hadn't considered it before, but I think you're right about that. It's just there's a whole lot more to nitpick. But, for me, it's like, there's things about Crowley that are very uncomfortable, and you kind of look at them, but it's also like, well, again, he's been dead for 75 years. So the question is not Crowley, the question is you. It's like, does that, if that, what is that, what can reading that stuff or interacting with that stuff tell you about yourself? And it's, if you reject something, it's like, well, great, now you know that you don't want that for your life, you know what I mean? And that's a helpful experience. So, for instance, heroin addiction. I mean, I think that he was just completely honest about, to some extent. I mean, there's a lot of delusional stuff in his writing, like thinking that you can overcome heroin addiction just by force of will and things like this. But you can, just like from reading William S. Burroughs or somebody like that, like you can get a sense of, yeah, this is really not what you want to do with your life. Like this, yeah. So, I mean, it's like I've always felt that if you consider him as a writer rather than a religious figure, if you consider him as a writer and commentator, he's pretty damn good.
Oh yeah. Well, there's a lot of lessons that can be learned by his like missteps in life, right? Like maybe don't get addicted to heroin, right? Maybe don't go so far into thinking that, like would we, like with the quote, do what thou wilt. When we say will in Thelema, I say it as we're talking about true will, not momentary want. And I think if you look at Crowley's life, you can actually see examples of this, right? Like you can see the heroin stuff. That was something he momentarily wanted, but it ended up actually blocking his true will in a lot of ways. And so that in and of itself can be sort of a parable to learn from. And I think when you look at it like that, it makes more sense and is a lot more clear. And yeah, I mean, there are quite a few things that he's said and done that I am not a fan of. But
well, maybe we should just say there's a lot of teachable moments with Crowley.
Teachable moments. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, because a lot can be learned from his successes and his missteps.
Yeah.
If you look deep into his life, there's a lot of insight there. And once again, Thelema is a very individual gnosis oriented path anyways. It's not like it's not the Aleister Crowley LARP society. That's not what Thelema is.
You would hope.
I mean, the reincarnations of Crowley on the internet may disagree. I get a lot of interest. I'll just say I get a lot of emails with people who think they're the reincarnation of Crowley to my business email.
Just wanted to let you know.
Yeah. I get these like long essays about how they know they're the true Crowley, and it's very bizarre. But Thelema's not supposed to be that.
That's always been the case. I mean, that was the case in the 60s. People were obsessed with that idea. And it's like just one of these inescapable things. Funnily enough, do you know Chogyam Trungpa?
Yes, I do. They're cutting through spiritual materialism.
Yeah. So Trungpa, before he died, said that when he died, he was going to, he had taken the Bodhisattva vow and all this. So he said, he was going to reincarnate as 10,000 Japanese businessmen. So maybe Crowley reincarnated as 10,000 schizos on the internet. You just never know.
And look, maybe Crowley, if anyone's going to reincarnate as like internet schizo posters, it would be Crowley.
I will reincarnate as 10,000 schizo posters. It could happen. Yeah. So there you go. So are there other big, do you find there are like big misconceptions besides just Crowley himself that you are kind of addressing a lot?
Yeah. So the Crowley thing's of course the biggest one. I think another one is just like what Thelema is. I find a lot of Thelemites like to argue even like, is Thelema a religion? Which I think it undoubtedly is. And so like there's questions like that. Is true will like doing whatever I want? Because a lot of people take the do what thou wilt quote to mean like I can do whatever I want whenever I want, and that's something that to work against. There's also been a lot of people saying that Thelema is like X or Y political ideology, which I don't like that take, because Crowley's politics were very just all over the place, and it's not a political ideology. Just has some political implications you can see here and there, but so that's one that I've been working against. That's a newer one. People will be like, being a Thelemite means you believe X, Y, or Z. And I'm like, well, not really. You can see vague anti-authoritarianism, but like, I don't think that's a whole thing. And then there's like, is the Thelema satanic thing? Are you like a Satanist stuff? I mean, that's any occult person I think has to deal with that one.
Yeah.
And also, like, can I be a Thelemite and not be a ceremonial magician? I find a lot of people who are younger, like in my age range, who are interested in Thelema are like, can I also do folk magic and be a Thelemite? Can I also do sigils and be a Thelemite? And I'm like, yes, you can. The Thelema cops are not going to come and arrest you for reading Crowley and not doing a Star Ruby.
That, yeah, if only. So,
You want to bring out the Thelema
well,
cups?
they do exist. They just don't leave their basements.
Very true. Very
So
true.
interesting, yeah. But it seems like overall people are just positive. Like it seems like pretty much like outside of like the usual like is Crowley bad? Is this Satanism? Is this bad? Which it's not obviously. It seems like those are all positive concerns. Like it's being excited about it, but wanting to know if you're doing it right. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
people are pretty positive. I've had mostly a positive reaction. Like even when I talked to the Financial Times at one point, and even they were like really chill
Wow,
with me.
what happened there?
Yeah, so one of the journalists from the Financial Times wanted to do a piece on witch talk, and they liked my TikTok. They're like, I like that you go deeper. And I talked with them, and even they were like really receptive to Thelema.
The
So I was
Financial
like, this is
Times?
strange. Kind of expected to like be a bit interrogated in that interview.
Wait, what? The Financial Times?
Yeah, I was surprised when I
Why the
got the DM
what?
too.
That's
They wanted to do a
amazing.
piece on why is witch talk popular, and so they talked with me about Thelema for a while, and I was like, huh, this is a little bizarre. But yeah, most people have been very positive. I maybe it's also that I'm not a very intimidating person or something. Like I don't have, I guess, a stereotypically like scary Satanist vibe, but
Right.
yeah, it's mostly positive in general.
Yeah, that's great. I definitely have certainly in the last few years it's like I think everyone who lived through the satanic panic era just remembers it not being like that. I mean, you know, Anton LaVey used to get bullets through his window, and had to black out the windows and make sure, and they had to like always walk under the windows in their house. So things have changed a lot, and Genesis, my mentor, got practically, had to go into self-imposed exile from England because of all these accusations were put out against her, and the mob was out to get her, and all of this. It's like, yeah. So I think everyone who went through that era or who learned from people who did just have this are just pretty traumatized and just have this like total fear. But I think that's definitely changed in the last 10 years. Now it's gone the other way, and that's pretty amazing, I think. And I'm always amazed. I always find myself catching myself now thinking, if anyone's being doubting and weird about it, it's me, in the sense of when I'm talking to people, it's like I'm hesitant to talk to people, but whenever I'm actually open with people, it's like they're positive. And one thing I learned really early on too was if I get if people ask me about it, if I get real like, oh well, that's secret and I can't tell you, and that's like, and I get dodgy about it, then they're
Yeah.
immediately suspicious for good reason, because they're like, okay, like what's going on here. But if I'm just open and positive, then they're completely receptive. So I think it has a lot to do with just how just being open with people and not being weird about it. That's what I discovered. So
Oh yeah, I find if you start getting sneaky about it or like being like, well, that's pride. I find that's when people get weird about it because they're like, what are you hiding from me?
yeah,
And then you
yeah,
get those kind of aggressive questions. Because I was at first really, when I started getting into the cult, nervous to tell people about it. And I find that people are more receptive if you just kind of like, this is what I'm into. It's just like any other religion or spirituality. Kind of try to talk like I'm just any other religious or spiritual person, just say what I believe and not say it in like a nervous way or like a kind of suspicious speaking way. I find
yeah,
people are much more receptive.
yeah,
Like
100%.
it's like this is just what I believe. It's my faith. I even use phrases like that. I'll just steal like mainstream religious phrasing and then just apply it to Thelema and phrase things in that way. And people I find are just more comfortable with it.
I just tell people I'm a meditation teacher, so
Yeah, exactly. No, even saying stuff like that,
which
people like
is
are.
true.
I'm like, oh, I'm just into if I don't want to have a long conversation about it, it's like, yeah, I'm just kind of into Western mysticism.
Hmm.
And they're like, okay.
Got it. So yeah, that's actually an interesting segue. So do you talk about meditation a lot? So I'm wondering, where have you found that the kind of the intersection with magic and meditation and maybe mindfulness and things like this is, because mindfulness has suddenly become a huge, it's like a corporate trend basically. It's like it's everywhere. Everyone wants mindfulness, and the difference between that and magic maybe is really just a word essentially. So in some senses. So where have you found the overlaps are there?
Yeah, so I think like a good magical practice, I like to divide it like this. This is just my personal way of explaining it. It's like there's three parts of it, three limbs of it, three branches of it. It's like the study, contemplation, meditation, and then like the praxis. And I think you need all those three sort of balance to have a good practice. I just noticed this as my own observation. But I think meditation is really important. Mindfulness, contemplation, taking time to think about things and be in your own space. Because if you can't control your like inner microcosm, how do you expect to control the macrocosm? Like that, it doesn't make sense. Like if you're going to do some ritual to control the macrocosm, but you don't have your own internal self like under control and understood, like it's not going to work, right? So I think you need those levels there. And I think meditation is very much like the foundation of any magical practice. I think that you like kind of need it to go to those far places, right? Like if you want to do some really elaborate rituals, that's great, but you need to have the foundations to be able to do that first. I think meditation is really important. I don't think you need to be some like crazy, I meditate for 9 hours a day and I'll live off rainwater or something like, no, but I think you should have a general like way of sort of centering your
I
mind.
live off rainwater actually.
Oh yeah, you're full like breatharian.
Yeah. Drink Rainian.
Yeah, I think it's just it's important to have that foundation there. And so I think meditation's important. I think that like everyone should be doing it. I think even just on a mental health level, it's like good. Like there's even been like I know psychologists and like therapists have been integrating like mindfulness meditation stuff into their work, which I'm not a psychologist or like a doctor or anything, but I think that's very cool in and of itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's also the level of, I mean, just that point alone that you're making, everyone needs to hear, which is just that, if you're looking for life to be a certain way, it does not come from you trying to grab something in the external world. It comes from you, it comes internally, it comes from the internal work that you do to align with what you really want in life and, and your mindset and everything. It comes from within. Whatever it is that you want, it's an internal journey, and that or rather, to put it even more simply, the external manifests from the internal to some extent, right? In tandem with everyone else in the world doing the same thing. So yeah, I don't think that, and in terms of like therapy adopting things like mindfulness, it's kind of like what we were saying earlier about. What else do you got? It's like this stuff just works better. It's like, then what? Like talk therapy for 30 years? This stuff actually works better. So
yeah, I think it's really important because like if I think we've all met those people in life who like have everything made on paper but are just completely miserable people. And I think that is proof that like what's going on internally really matters because you can have things in your life that work, but you can still hate everything. And I think like knowing that and recognizing that is really important to realize that you do need to do internal work and you do need to think about this stuff. Even if you're not going to like be doing, I don't know, Solomonic magic or something, right? I think just even having something can really help you avoid that trap. Because I've seen people who have had like objectively worse lives than some other people who are happier, And I think it's important to learn that and recognize that as a phenomenon.
Yeah, that's 1,000% true. That's it. And that's true across cultures too. Like I remember when I was traveling just out of college, I was traveling in India and Kathmandu or Nepal and Kathmandu in Nepal and just meeting, some of the happiest people who had like literally didn't have, a plate or a fork to their name. And then but yet they're immersed in ritual and magic and connection with God all day long. And that's a little bit over romanticizing it because like poverty really sucks and we need to help, I think that the world has made great strides in overcoming it to some extent, but those unfortunately could go backwards really fast because of the fallout of COVID, the fallout of the sanctions of Russia. I mean, things could get real nightmarish on Earth very fast, particularly for the developing world. So we need to pay attention to that. But so I don't want to like oversimplify it. But I just remember coming back to America after traveling over there, and it's just like everyone is so rich here. Even the poorest person seems like a king compared to people there, and yet everyone's miserable. They're like living in their perfect air-conditioned houses, and just they're full of misery, and they have all these things to entertain them and serve them, and they're just unhappy. And so it's just it's one of life's bitter ironies, because it's so gross in a way, but it's also, people don't have a context. Maybe people for comparison, they look at the people right next to each other rather than the grand scheme of things. Maybe that's part of it, but it's so true. I mean, you can live in hell, but in your mind you're in heaven. And conversely, you can live in heaven, but in your mind you're in hell because of your own thoughts and your own torment of yourself. And
Absolutely.
the way out of that is, I think, certainly meditation practice helps a lot.
Yeah, I think people just need something more in life, right? I think that can be a lot of things, but I think people fundamentally need something more, something higher, something beyond the material, just in some way. Because I think otherwise it can just life can feel very soulless. And I don't think anyone wants that.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's been proven true by history many times, whether it was, you just can't cut that off from people, whether it's people living totally materialist lives in capitalist societies, or when people were totally shut off from religion in communist bloc countries like Russia and China. And it's like, that just does not work. People are not meant to be totally severed from the spiritual dimension.
No, not at all. And you see so much, like, people just fall apart whenever it happens on either way.
So what's next for you? Do you have kind of plans for where you're going to take things in the future?
Yeah. So my sort of next steps, I'm gonna keep doing what I'm doing, continue posting and all that. I'm working on a book that's like the big next thing. That's a big exciting thing
Great.
ahead. So that's coming out in the fall. So that's my
Can you say anything about it yet, or is it still under wraps?
Yeah. So it went up for pre-orders like this week.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's
Good
called
timing
Begin.
for this episode then, so people can find it
Yeah.
on Amazon.
Yeah, it's on Amazon. It's Begin with True Will by Georgina Rose. It's a beginner Thelema book for people of sort of the new people coming in who want sort of a modern approach to it. And it's pretty solitary oriented, so anyone can pick it up. It's just supposed to be like Thelema for the modern day, basically.
That's awesome. And where can people find out more about you, like on Instagram and TikTok? And do you have a central website or anything like that?
I don't have a website. I have like a link tree that has them all in one sort of tier, like list, but I just go by Dot Darling, DAT, like the Sephora Darling, on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, Twitch, Instagram. I'm like on every platform, on Patreon. I'm all the places. I don't think there's really any social media place that I'm not on, but yeah, just look that up. Or Georgina Rose. I tend to pop up if you just type that in as well.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much for being on. We hope to hear lots more from you in the future. And that was an awesome conversation.
Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. This was a great chat.
Absolutely. Great to meet you again.
Great to meet you.
Okay.
Have a lovely afternoon.
You too. Bye.
Bye.